Snow White.
Snow White is a German fairy tale known across much of Europe, and is today one of the most famous fairy tales worldwide. The Brothers Grimm published it in 1812 in the first edition of their collection Grimm's Fairy Tales. It was titled in German, Sneewittchen, and numbered as Tale 53. The Grimms completed their final revision of the story in 1854. The fairy tale features such elements as the magic mirror, the poisoned apple, the glass coffin, and the characters of the evil queen and the seven dwarfs, who were first given individual names in the Broadway play Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1912, and then given different names in Walt Disney's 1937 film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The Grimm story, which is commonly referred to as Snow White, should not be confused with the story of Snow White and Rose Red, in German Sneewittchen und Rosenrot, another fairy tale collected by the Brothers Grimm. In the Thompson folklore classification, tales of this kind are grouped together as Type 709, Snow White. Others of this kind include Bella Venetia, Messina, Murray Haydig, and Gold Tree and Silver Tree.
Plot.
At the beginning of the story, a queen sits sewing at an open window during a winter snowfall when she pricks her finger with her needle, causing 3 drops of blood dripping into the freshly fallen snow on the black windowsill. Admiring the beauty of the resulting color combination, she says to herself, "Oh, how I wish that I had a daughter that had skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." Soon after that, the queen gives birth to a baby girl who is as white as snow, with lips as red as blood, and with hair as black as ebony. They name her Snow White, but sadly, the queen dies after giving birth to her. After a year has passed, the king takes a new wife, who is beautiful but also unutterably wicked and vain. The new queen possesses a magic mirror which she asks every morning, "Magic mirror in my hand, who is the fairest in the land?" The mirror always replies, "My queen, you are the fairest in the land." The queen is always pleased with that because the magic mirror never lies. But, when Snow White reaches the age of 7, she becomes as beautiful by the day and even more beautiful than the queen, and when the queen asks her mirror, it responds, "My queen, you are the fairest here, so true. But Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." This gives the queen a great shock. She becomes yellow and green with envy, and from that hour on, her heart turns against Snow White and hates Snow White more and more each day. Envy and pride, like ill weeds, grow in her heart taller every day, until she has no peace day or night. Eventually, the queen orders a huntsman to take Snow White into the deepest woods to be killed. As proof that Snow White is dead, the queen demands that he return with her lungs and liver. The huntsman takes Snow White into the forest. After raising his knife, he finds himself unable to kill her as she sobs heavily and begs him, "Oh, dear huntsman, don't kill me. Leave me with my life, I will run into the forest and never come back." The huntsman leaves her behind alive, convinced that the girl would be eaten by some wild animal. He instead brings the queen the lungs and liver of a young boar, which is prepared by the cook and eaten by the queen. After wandering through the forest for days, Snow White discovers a tiny cottage belonging to a group of 7 dwarfs. Since no one is at home, she eats some of the tiny meals, drinks some of their wine, and then tests all the beds. Finally, the last bed is comfortable enough for her and she falls asleep. When the 7 dwarfs return home, they immediately become aware that someone sneaked in secretly, because everything in their home is in disorder. During their loud discussion about who sneaked in, they discover the sleeping Snow White. The girl wakes up and explains to them what happened, and the dwarfs take pity on her, saying, "If you will keep house for us, and cook, make beds, wash, sew, and knit, and keep everything clean and orderly, then you can stay with us, and you shall have everything that you want." They warn her to be careful when alone at home and to let no one in when they are away delving in the mountains. Meanwhile, the queen asks her mirror once again, "Magic mirror in my hand, who is the fairest in the land?" The mirror replies, "My queen, you are the fairest here, so true. But Snow White beyond the mountains at the 7 dwarfs is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen is horrified to learn that the huntsman has betrayed her and that Snow White is still alive. She keeps thinking about how to get rid of Snow White, then she disguises herself as an old peddler. The queen then walks to the cottage of the dwarfs and offers her colorful, silky-laced bodices and convinces the girl to take the most beautiful bodice as a present. Then the queen laces it so tightly that Snow White faints, causing the queen to leave her for dead. But the dwarfs return just in time and Snow White revives when the dwarfs loosen the laces. Next morning the queen consults a mirror anew and the mirror reveals Snow White's survival. Now infuriated, the queen dresses as a comb seller and convinces Snow White to take a beautiful comb as a present. She brushes Snow White's hair with a poisoned comb and the girl faints again, but she is again revived by the dwarfs. And the next morning the mirror tells the queen that Snow White is still 1,000 times more beautiful. Now the queen nearly has a heart attack in shock and rage. As a third and last try, she secretly consults the darkest magic and makes a poisoned apple, and in the disguise of a farmer's wife, she offers it to Snow White. The girl is, at first, hesitant to accept it, so the queen cuts the apple in half, eating the white, harmless, part and giving the red, poisoned, part to Snow White. The girl eagerly takes a bite and falls into a state of suspended animation, causing the queen to triumph. This time, the dwarfs are unable to revive the girl, because they cannot find the source of Snow White's poor health and, assuming that she is dead, they place her in a glass coffin. Time passes and a prince traveling through the land sees Snow White. He strides to her coffin, and enchanted by her beauty, instantly falls in love with her. The dwarfs succumb to his entreaties to let him have the coffin, and as his servants carry the coffin away, they stumble on some roots. The tremor caused by the stumbling causes the piece of poisoned apple to dislodge from Snow White's throat, awakening her. The prince then declares his love for her, and soon a wedding is planned. The couple invite every queen and king to come to the wedding party, including Snow White's stepmother. Meanwhile, the queen, still believing that Snow White is dead, again asks her magical mirror who is the fairest in the land. The mirror says, "You, my queen, are fair so true. But the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." Appalled, in disbelief and with her heart full of fear and doubts, the queen is, at first, hesitant to accept the invitation, but she eventually decides to go. Not knowing that this new queen was indeed her stepdaughter, she arrives at the wedding, and her heart fills with the deepest of dread when she realizes the truth. As a punishment for her attempted murders, a pair of glowing hot iron shoes are brought forth with tongs and placed before the queen. She is forced to step into the burning shoes and to dance until she drops dead.
Variations.
In their first edition, the Brothers Grimm published the version they had first collected, in which the villain of the piece is Snow White's jealous mother. In a version sent to another folklorist prior to the first edition, additionally, she does not order a servant to take her to the woods, but takes her there herself to gather flowers and abandons her. In the first edition, this task was transferred to a servant. It is believed that the change to a stepmother in later editions was to tone down the story for children. The most famous version of Snow White is the 1937 American animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by Walt Disney. Disney's variation of Snow White gave the dwarfs names and included a singing Snow White. Instead of her lungs and liver, as written in the original, the huntsman is asked by the queen to bring back Snow White's heart. Snow White is much more mature, about 14. And she is discovered by the dwarfs after cleaning the house, not vandalizing it. Furthermore, in the Disney movie the evil queen tries only once to kill Snow White, by a poisoned apple, and fails. She then dies by falling down a cliff, after the dwarfs had chased her through the forest. In the original, the queen is forced to dance to death. In Snow White, 1987, produced by Canon Movie Tales, the evil queen, after being informed for the last time that Snow White is alive and the most fair, is consumed with rage and hurls an object at the mirror causing it to crack. As she travels to the wedding, the mirror continues to crack, corresponding to the evil queen aging rapidly. By the time she reaches the wedding and bursts in, She is an old hag and is humiliated by the crowd. She leaves and, simultaneously with the mirror in her castle, disintegrates into a pile of dust while Snow White and the prince are married. In the 2012 adaptation Snow White and the Huntsman, directed by Rupert Sanders, Snow White becomes a warrior in order to overthrow the queen and the Huntsman is presented as her mentor and possible love interest. Another 2012 adaptation, Mirror Mirror, stars Julia Roberts and Lily Collins and was directed by Tarsem Singh. Many later versions omit the Queen's attempted cannibalism, eating what she believed to be the lungs and liver of Snow White. This may be a reference to Old Slavic mythology which includes tales of witches eating human hearts.
Influence. Main influence.
In 1986, Bartels, a German scholar, published an analysis suggesting that the folk tale of Snow White was based upon Maria Sophia Margaretha Katharina von Erthal, who was born in Lura, Maine on June 25, 1729. M. B. Kittel, the chronicler of the family, described her as a charitable and kind angel, active against poverty and destitution. Due to the qualities of Maria Sophia, Lou population had become a kind of fairy. Another fact was that the people felt sympathy for Maria Sophia, while cruelty added to the behavior of her stepmother. Maria Sophia suffered from partial blindness since childhood and it was due to the aftermath of chickenpox. Whereas Snow White's father was a king, Maria Sophia's father, Philip Christoph von Erthal, was only a superior magistrate, representing the Prince Elector of Mainz in Loo. The castle of the Prince Elector of Mainz in Loo was his official residence and home of his family. After the death of her birth mother in 1741, Maria Sophia's father remarried in 1743. The stepmother, Claudia Elizabeth von Reichenstein, was domineering and employed her new position to the advantage of her children from her first marriage. A mirror now called the Talking Mirror is located at the Spessart Museum in the Loo Castle, where Maria Sophia was born. It was a product of Loo mirror manufacture, Kurmansich Spiegelmanufaktur. These mirrors became a favorite gift at European crown and aristocratic courts. Because the mirror repeats every word of who speaks at it. This mirror was the present from the father of Maria Sophia to Claudia Elizabeth, the stepmother. Have been proved local references of the tale in the area of Loo. Currently, Loo are even called the Gate of Spessart. The skate path of Snow White on Seven Hills was the mountain trail, the Wizerstrasse. From Loo, through this journey, for the seven Spessart mountains, who could reach the little kingdom of the seven dwarfs. The poisoned apple that gave stepmother to Maria Sophia, was half submerged in juice of belladonna. Fruit that is also found in the Spessart. Its berries contain atropa belladonna used even actually in medicine. Its narcotics produced in her as if he had died. The big difference between Snow White and Sophia Maria is Maria Sophia had no prince to save her. She stayed dead.
Another possible influence
is incorporated the love part to the tale with the investigation of the German historian Eckhard Sander. This Snow White was a young countess named Margaret von Waldeck who lived in Germany in the first half of the 16th century, in the same time when the then Prince Philip II travelling in this area of the European continent know the limits of his future kingdom and also say that looking for women that satisfied his desire. Margaret was a young woman of extraordinary beauty who died poisoned by intriguing court of the empire, so that prevented married King Philip II of Spain. Sander does not explain as whether the poisoning occurred with an apple, as they say in the story, or some other concoction was used. People say that the Spanish king, a young introvert who married at a very young age with his cousin Maria of Portugal, a young woman who died shortly after birth. Subsequently, for political reasons, his father, King Charles V, was forced to marry an aunt 11 years older than him. That was when Felipe II, he had a passionate love story with a German countess, but was cut short by interests political. Sander not said if the poison was with an apple. It is a fact that after travelling in his youth by Flanders and Germany, he returned to the mainland and never came out of it. That somehow shows that it is a fantasy to revive the princess with a kiss. The seven dwarfs of the story also exist, according to Sander. The historian says that all were malnourished and aged children working in the iron mines of the properties of von Waldeck. Because of their poverty, they wore long coats, and Sander also said that the Countess liked to play with these children aged face because of work which made them look like dwarfs. And because of their poverty, they wore long coats and beanies.
From other European traditions.
Many other variations of the story exist across Europe. In some of these variations the dwarfs are robbers, while the magic mirror is a dialogue with a sun or moon. In a version from Albania, collected by Johann Georg von Hahn, the main character lives with 40 dragons. Her sleep is caused by a ring. The beginning of the story has a twist, in that a teacher urges the heroine to kill her evil stepmother so that she would take her place. The origin of this tale is debated. It is likely no older than the Middle Ages. In fact, there are possibly two Albanian versions of Snow White, one where her stepmother tries to kill her, and another where her two jealous sisters try to kill her. The Jealous Sisters is another Albanian fairy tale. In both fairy tales the death is caused by a ring. Paralleling the stepmother's question of her magic mirror, the Indian epic poem Padmavat, 1540, includes the line, "Who is more beautiful, I or Padmavati?" Queen Negamati asks to her new parrot, and it gives a displeasing reply. Muri Hudag from Armenia is the daughter of a woman who asks the moon who is the most beautiful in the world, and the response is always Nuri Hudag. The mother plots to kill her daughter. The story in Russian writer Alexander Pushkin's poem The Tale of the Dead Princess and the Seven Knights, 1833, is similar to that of Snow White, with knights replacing dwarfs.
Modern uses and adaptations.
A silent film titled Snow White was made by famous players Lasky and produced by Adolf Zook and Daniel Frohman. Directed by J. Seldorley, it was adapted to the screen by Jesse Braham White from his play Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1912. The film starred Marguerite Clark as Snow White, Creighton Hale as Prince Florimond, and Dorothy Cumming as Queen Branjama Mary Jane. A West German all-new, all-live version Sneewittchen und die Sieben Zwerge was released in 1955. The film was later dubbed in English and released in North America in 1965. Relativity Media released a Snow White project, titled Mirror Mirror, directed by Tarsem Singh, on March 30, 2012. It stars Julia Roberts as the Evil Queen, Lily Collins as Snow White, Ami Umar as Prince the Andrew Walcott, and Nathan Lane as Brighton, the Queen's majordomo. Snow White, A Tale of Terror, 1997, is a film with Sigourney Weaver as the Evil Queen. The 2012 feature film Snow White and the Huntsman, directed by Rupert Sanders, stars Kristen Stewart as Snow White, Charlize Theron as the Wicked Queen, Chris Hemsworth as Eric the Huntsman, and Sam Claflin as Prince William. The story of Snow White is a popular theme for British pantomime. In some productions of Stephen Sondheim's musical Into the Woods, Snow White appears as the illicit love interest of one of the princes. Snow White is a major character in the comic book series Fables, by Bill Willingham and The Wolf Among Us. The video game Banjo-Kazooie has a Snow White-like plot, with the witch Gruntilda acting as the Evil Queen and Tootie acting as Snow White. Trayon's concept photo for Girls' Generation's third studio album The Boys was inspired by Snow White.
Trademark.
In 2013 the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office issued a trademark to Disney Enterprises, Incorporated, for the name Snow White that covers all live and recorded movie, television, radio, stage, computer, internet, news, and photographic entertainment uses, except literature works of fiction and non-fiction.